your barn, your
Yeah.
parents are,
Okay.
go into it.
You want me to go ahead now?
Sure.
Yes.
Well, I'm Evan Hansen, the youngest of 11 children of Peter Hansen and Harriet Charlotte Williams. My dad and mother were raised up in Cache Valley, up in Hiram. Dad moved to Darby, Idaho, where some of the children were born, and I was born there, and my older brother Orrin was born in Darby. But my mother got quite ill with heart trouble up there. They figured the high altitude was rough on her, so they moved to Syracuse. I was about 6 or 7 months old when they moved down, and that was quite a move. They loaded everything on a wagon, and the boys and Dad came down on the wagon, and Mother and I and the sisters came down on a train from Rexburg down. And we landed in Syracuse in March of 1911. And Dad had $12 in cash. It's all he had in his pocket, and all he owned. And he knew a man by the name of Kilpack, who he had written to and talked to, and Mr. Kilpack arranged for him to buy the Baird home. And there was a home down on the Bluff Road on our property, and we lived there. I don't remember living there, but we probably lived there for a year or 2 years, and then moved up to the home that we lived in all the rest of the time we were in Syracuse, which is, well, it's about a quarter of a mile north of Clyde's home.
All right.
And that's how we came to move to Syracuse. And I grew up down there. We went to school there. We had quite a time. The family that lived right across the road from us, that were our closest neighbors, were the Young family. I've forgotten his name, but her name was Clara Young, and they had one son named Lee. He was older. Mr. Young died. I don't remember much about him. I remember seeing him, but I don't remember much about him. But Mrs. Young was a good neighbor. She was a good neighbor. She'd keep contact, and was very good. Lee Young was quite a character. He ran the farm, and I used to work for him quite a little bit when I was little. I remember he paid me 15 or 25 cents a week, and then that much a day later on. But I worked quite a lot for Lee. When I was quite small, I started doing little jobs, and then later on I got to do bigger jobs. I remember one day he and I were working out in the field with raking hay and piling it. I'd run the rake. I had a horse on a dump rake, and I'd drive the horse and the rake, and he'd come along behind me piling it. I remember that day particularly because he had a watermelon patch. And, we took time out in the middle of the hay baling or piling to eat a watermelon out of the patch, and we ate a whole melon. And the rest of the time I didn't have to work very hard because he couldn't quite make it around that field without having to stop and relieve himself. But he was good to me, always good. I remember he put me in the barn stacking hay, and he had 3 wagons that he'd hired the people to work on them. Art Anderson had one of the wagons. I remember he put me up in that barn stacking hay, and I tell you, I worked and I worked, and I'd hollered at him, tell him I couldn't handle it anymore. He says, "Oh, that's all right, let it go." So we finished the day out a little easier after that. I didn't work so hard. But he was a pretty good farmer, as I remember. His crops were always pretty good.
What did he raise, or what did you folks raise as crops?
We raised alfalfa, hay, and some grain, and sugar beets, and tomatoes and potatoes. And I think that's about all we ever raised.
They put up hay a lot different than we do now, don't they?
Yes, I never saw a bale of hay hardly until late years after I moved away. It was a job. I was the youngest, and I'd get the job of riding the derrick horse or tromping hay on the wagons, which I hated with a passion.
So did I.
But it was quite a job. I had brothers that were older than me. I had 4 brothers there. I don't think they spoiled me. I think I took the brunt end of most things for a long time. But that's just what I think. That probably isn't so. We used to work hard on the farm. But Dad would usually raise around 20 acres of sugar beets and 6 or 7 acres of tomatoes, and not so many potatoes, but he'd always raise a few. So I remember one year we raised potatoes and the price went down, and I remember he loaded a whole carload of potatoes for 25 cents a bag, 100-pound bag. That's the way things were. But I know some of the things we used to go swimming in Clarence Smedley's pond quite a bit.
I remember it.
Do you?
You bet.
That's where I learned to swim. I was there. But, we had lots of fun. School was good. I remember my first day of school. I was scared to death, but Edna Cook was my teacher, and I thought she was about the most wonderful person I'd ever known after a while. She was real good. We had, the schoolhouse had 4 rooms. Had 2 classes in each room, and she was quite a wonderful person. I remember one day Oak and I, now Oak was probably the best friend I had in Syracuse. He was a good fellow. But one day we played hooky from school and went down, and that time they had the chicken most anywhere. They didn't have chicken coop there most anywhere. But we went down along the road in back of the houses and found all the eggs we could find, and went up and traded them in at the store for candy and other stuff. And we thought we'd get back to school before anybody missed us, and walking up the road, who should we meet come down the road but Edna Cook. She knew we weren't supposed to be there. She took us back. We didn't get in much trouble, though. It was pretty good.
That when you was in grade school?
Yes. I don't remember what grade. I think I was in about the 3rd grade then, because I wasn't in her room. But the church was the center of activity out there, as we all know.
Yes.
It isn't so much now, I'm sure. But we'd go to church, and everyone went to church. Everyone that belonged to the church. The Young family weren't Latter-day Saints. But Lee used to tell us lots of stories. I guess he was quite a character, I suppose, but he was awfully good to us. Mrs. Young was especially good. I remember one day One day I went out and was swiping peaches and grapes out of her back of their house in a little orchard they had. And I had my pockets full and my hands full and came walking up. I walked right past the house going out. And Mrs. Young saw me and hollered at me. And she taught me that that wasn't the thing to do. That I remember she took me in the kitchen and sat me down and she gave me a banana and something else real nice. And we had quite a nice visit there. And I appreciated that lady all the rest of my life out there. She was just a fine person. I thought a lot about that, a way to discipline a young fellow. I didn't ever do it again. I guess I did a lot of other things I shouldn't, but I didn't do any. I didn't swipe her grapes and peaches anymore. But I have some real good memories of Syracuse. Kids there, we used to. I had a little horse named Silver, a little pinto, small pinto, I guess. Not too small though. But I used to ride him all the time, and Oak and I used to herd cows on our horses, and it seemed like he'd have the job of taking care of his cows at his place, and I'd have the job of herding ours, keeping them where they belonged. And we got in a little trouble. We'd go roaming off down to the lower store, way down west. And go down there, and when we'd come back, the cows would be someplace they shouldn't be. That would be for sure. One day my dad caught me, and the cows got over in Barber's field. And, got back and just getting them out, and my dad come down, and he was so mad. He was really going to whip me for that. And he came toward me and he scared Silver, and Silver took off. And I let him go. I didn't see him until later in the afternoon. But Oak and I had some real good times together. What else can I say?
Somebody was saying, did any of the boys deliver mail on their ponies?
The paper?
Was it
the paper? Yes, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, would you?
Well, that was the job that Orrin got at Ole. Got the job carrying the Deseret News.
Oh.
And he got the job belonging just about the time school started, I guess. And he had a job topping the neighbors' beets, and he had to work for a month or so. So I inherited that job of carrying the mail on that horse, and that's something that I hated with a passion. I'll tell you. I carried it all winter. We'd go up to Clearfield and get the papers, and deliver them around the whole town. And boy, I tell you, it got cold sometimes. But old Silver and I managed. We carried the papers. If somebody would be a long ways down a lane somewhere, if it was extra cold or late or something, I'd miss them. And I'd always get caught up on. I remember one of the barbers, Barber, I believe it was, lived way off the road, and when I went to collect the money, why, he deducted 5 cents off the bill for every time I'd missed him, and that pretty well took all the money. And that taught me a few things. I learned something. Learned to be a little more dependable. But we did carry this. I don't know how long we did that, but carried the Deseret News for a long time.
Yeah.
As a result of that, I've never encouraged my kids to get a paper out.
Oh yeah.
None of them have ever had a paper out. I think that's probably why.
That'd take quite a while to go to Clearfield on a pony and then back and around, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I went all over Syracuse with them too, and it was a job. It was project.
Sure it would be.
The thing I remember about Syracuse probably more than anything else is Art Anderson and the Boy Scouts. Art was the principal of our school. Of course, we got pretty well acquainted with him, and I had him for 2 years in school. I remember he came in one day, stood there looking over the room, and he looked over the room, and nobody knew what was the matter, except they'd been doing some remodeling in the school, and they'd put an inside bathroom in there with inside water. And he looked over and he looked down. He says, "Evan, your face is the dirtiest of anyone's here." It was the time we'd been out playing shinny, and I'd got mud splattered all over my face. So I got the chance to be the first one to use the inside bathroom in the schoolhouse. And another time, when I was in the first grade, I believe, he came in the room and he looked all over the room and he says, "Evan, will you come here a minute?" So he took me out, and they were putting on a school play, The Bird's Christmas Carol. And I was Larry, the littlest one. And they had to give me a bath right on the stage. They did. They gave me a bath right on the stage. I was sure embarrassed, but I was Larry. And I went by the name of Larry all the rest of the time I lived in Syracuse. But I was embarrassed, but they did it. And I mean, I took my clothes off. It wasn't a sham. It was a real bath in a little round number 3 tub.
Yeah.
Then on Halloween, it used to be quite a time on Halloween out in Syracuse.
I'm sure.
I don't think the kids do the mischief now on Halloween that they did in those days. We'd always have a party someplace, go to a party, and then after the party, all the fun started. They used to do some funny things. They had a 4-holer at the back of the old Syracuse Merc, and that used to be moved every year as regularly as Halloween had come along, and usually right up on the front steps of the store it would be the next morning. And Dan Walker would always get mad about
Yes,
it.
I'm sure he would.
But they'd move it back. He had a lot more patience than most people would have had, I think, with it. And then did some of the craziest things. I remember Phil Bennett. They used to visit him quite a lot. I remember one time they had his cows all out in the yard where the horses were, and the horses were all put in the stanchions inside in the barn. How they kept tearing them all apart, I can't believe it now. Then I think they put a wagon right up on top of his barn one time. Things like that. But one of the craziest things, you never knew when you were safe. But usually they weren't destructive things that the kids did. They were interesting.
Interesting. Unusual. Didn't I hear that that they would go to some farmer's place and harness up his cows and hitch them to a wagon or something? Do you remember anything like that?
Yes, I do. I remember that. I think they did that with Phil Bennett once.
Mm.
I think. I don't know why they just pick on certain people, but he was one that usually got things done to him. He's passed away a few years ago, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Is his wife still alive?
Yes, but her mind isn't good now. She's
Oh,
failing.
isn't it?
She's failing pretty bad.
Was her name Pearl? Well, what's her?
Maud.
Maud, yeah. Well, that's too bad. We all get older.
Oh,
The thing
But we
about
do.
Art Anderson, I used to, and I think now that he probably did more than any other one individual to bring a few things into Syracuse that were good. At school, of course, we had the baseball team. I suppose would have had that without him, but he did a good job of it. We had a baseball team, and that was the important thing in the school year was the baseball team. I used to play. I was captain of the team the last year I was there. We had a good team. Always had a good team. I remember one day we had a Sister Parker, Mrs. Parker, that taught the 3rd and 4th grades. And she sent me out in her buggy. I had to go out no, it wasn't in her buggy. She had a horse and a buggy there, but I had to go down her horse and go clear to West Point. They had a sandstorm, a bad one. And I had to ride clear over there and tell them we wouldn't have the ball game. That was a caution doing that in school, but we did it. But I was captain of the baseball team and took quite an interest in it. I remember one day, which was one of the sad days of my life. My mother died when I was only 8 years old.
Oh, yeah.
I think I was in the 3rd grade then. And Dad married again. He married a lady by the name of Geneva Harter, lived in Salt Lake, and she had 2 boys, one the same age as me and one 2 years older. But I remember one day we had our Friday baseball game. Right in the middle of it, here come my dad up to the baseball park, and he was boiling mad. His wife, Geneva, was coming from Salt Lake, coming up, and I was supposed to have gone up and met her with the buggy up at Clearfield at the Bamberger station, and I don't know whether I'd forgotten on purpose or just plain forgotten. But that was a sad day. I had to quit in the middle of that ball game and go up and get her up to the station.
What position did you play?
Shortstop.
Shortstop. Did they have girls' teams too that
No.
time? Just boys?
Just boys. And then, of course, in the summer, the baseball team in Syracuse that was the big thing of the year, was the baseball team. They played all over the county, played Bountiful. Each town had a team, and Syracuse always had a good one. They had a real good team. Some of the players I remember, Glenn Briggs was first baseman for years. He was first baseman. Arnold Miller was their top pitcher.
Pitcher.
Charlie Barber was a pitcher also.
Oh, yeah.
And I always had a good one. My brothers always played on it, but I managed to play the last year I lived out there. I played a little,
Good.
Not much, but a little. But they had a good one. Things have sure changed through the years. I remember R.C. Allred was a teacher in the high school out there, and he took quite an active part in the life of the town. Remember they had a party, and they'd have him as master of the ceremonies. He was a good one.
Oh.
He was real good. I used to remember some of his stories that he'd tell for a long time. And the band was quite an important thing. The scout band that Art Anderson started was quite important. Played all over the country. They became quite famous. The scout band. I had 3 brothers that played in it, but I never did. They were more musically inclined than me. They played the saxophone, and of think Lynn played the trombone, I think. And Warren, I think he played the trumpet, I believe. Later on played along with the Ellis boys, he played a with strings.
Guitar?
Guitar, yeah, he played a guitar with the Ellis boys, and they became quite well known.
Yes, they were.
Elwin and Alton, they were quite well known. And it was quite a good time. I remember at one time they had something out in the amusement hall. They had someone came and demonstrate a radio. When radios first came, they had a crystal set they demonstrated in the ward there in the church.
Mm.
And we saw that.
Good.
And then later years, after we had married, after my wife and I were married, we went back to the New York World's Fair, and then Rockefeller Center there. We participated in the first television.
Oh yeah.
They had me go in one room and her another, and one of us would be on television, and that was something. But that's when it first started.
Mm.
When I think that that my wife and I, between us, have participated in the first radio and the first television, it makes you feel like you're real old, I'll tell you.
A lot of changes.
Surely were. And my dad, he's a farmer, but he sold Studebaker wagons, Studebaker farm equipment for a long time. And I remember going over with him one day over to Ogden, and they had a bunch of cars in there with big white sheets over them. I asked my dad what they were, and he says, they're automobiles. They're Studebaker automobiles. He later bought one.
Mm. Yeah. Mm.
He bought one that it was quite a milestone in our life, and
Sure.
I remember my dad. He didn't drive very well then, of course, because he'd been driving horses and wagons. But I can remember the first car that he had. It was a big Four Studebaker, and he brought it there, and Clyde and Fay did the driving. He taught them how to drive, the fellow that sold it to us, and they'd pull it in we'd took the front off an old granary to use for a garage, and he'd pull it in there, and the fellow told him to pull the gas feet out when they stopped, and then it'd start easier. And Dad got in there one day, and he started that up, and the gas was right to the top, and he backed it out and got it in some gear and went ahead, and he went right out through the orchard. That thing revved up as fast as it would go, and I tell you, he didn't hit any trees. He finally got it stopped, but he got out of that car and he wouldn't drive for a long, long time. What else can we talk about?
Was there a post office there in Syracuse when you were young?
No,
Okay.
no, there wasn't. We got our mail out of Layton,
Okay.
and our address was Layton, Utah.
What was the streets known as? Was there names on it? There wasn't the
No.
numbering system we have now.
There were no names on any street that I ever remember.
Did they refer to them by any particular, like Thurgood Street or anything, or just?
I can't ever remember that. I think we just remembered the street somebody'd live on, and if we had to tell somebody where to go, we'd go by a mile this way and a mile that way and so forth. I don't ever remember any names being on any streets. The only one I ever remember a name for was the Bluff Road.
It was always known to you as the Bluff Road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to know that pretty good because it divided our farm. The upper part was good farmland, the bottom was all swamp,
Yes.
salt grass. And I used to have to take the cows down to pasture, and I'd have to go down by Cuddy Rampton's and then cut back along the Bluff Road. One day I was on Old Silver, taking the cows down to pasture, and we had an old bull, a Holstein bull in there. She was fine, never scared anybody or anything, but one day we had to go past another pasture. There was a cow in there that was looking for companionship. That old bull tried to get in there, and I was trying to get him away, and he whirled around and charged me in Old Silver. And he hit right on my leg, right on the side, and one horn on either side, and knocked the horse over, clear over, but he cut a big gash in the horse's shoulder. I had to lead him. I got the cows down to the pasture and got him in finally. But I never could ever ride that horse down around that bull again. He would, I just couldn't.
Yeah.
I'd have to walk and take the cows and back. But Syracuse was always as you remembered, it was always a good memory.
Mm-hmm.
The things were good that you think about Syracuse.
Yeah.
Was the world today, we're so busy in our own individual lives, but there was a special spirit or unity there within the city, huh?
Oh yes, yes. I remember my mother passed away when I was 8 years old. She died in the flu epidemic of 1918. I remember she died, and they wouldn't let us hold the funeral up in the church. They held the funeral right out in front of the house. I can remember that. I remember my mother. I remember them carrying her out past my bed because I was sick at the time too. After that, my dad and my two sisters spent a lot of time taking care of people with the flu and that flu epidemic. And people looked after you pretty well. I remember if we had any problems in the family, why someone would be there to help us. It was a good place. I still get a thrill sometimes out of reading about something that happened out in Syracuse. What was it, a week or two ago, there was quite a lot of talk about building a road down through Syracuse, down out to Antelope Island. The road's been built for a few years, hasn't it?
Yes, there was one there.
But they're going to pave it.
Well, it got flooded. The one that was there got flooded, and so it hasn't been used now for some time. It's been underwater.
Oh.
But the lake is receding now considerably, and some of it's above water, I think. But some of our local people there, Bill Holt's son, especially Scott Holt, he's a representative in the legislature, is pushing legislation to get a new causeway built. And whether that'll go through or not, I don't know. But it'll cost quite a lot, but we'll see what comes on that.
Oh, yes.
The legislature hasn't approved it yet, but they might.
Can I tell you anything more?
What about the roads conditions? Did any of you participate in building or the roads? What type
Well, the
of
roads,
conditions?
I can't remember who was over the roads, but he had quite a reputation because all the roads out there, he'd build up to a high point, and that was good because the snow would blow off. But they were muddy. They weren't gravel, they were muddy. when it rained, you had mud, and you just learned to live with it. We had no, I'm sure we had no gravel roads in Syracuse for quite a few years, quite a lot of years.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad had a milk route that he'd gather milk up from the farmers, and in the winter it was pretty good. We'd use bobsleighs, but the spring and the fall got pretty rough because of the muddy roads. But you could make it a little rough with cars. They had to change the roads a little and make them a little wider when they had cars, but the one thing I can remember about the roads, they had different places in different areas where someone would build a ditch across the road or something. Joe Willie built a ditch across the road down by his place. It was east, a little ways east of where Willie's furniture store is now. But they used to call that Joe Willie's viaduct. And he built it on top of the road and filled on, so it was, you just come up and went down over that hump in the road. And it became a little of a problem with cars because if it was too muddy, you couldn't get over that viaduct.
You mentioned the milk route. Could you tell us a little more about that, the route and where they hauled it?
Well, yes, when Dad first started, he hauled it up to Layton. It went to Layton, and from there it was loaded on trucks and taken to Salt Lake. But he'd had a wagon for quite a few years. He used horses entirely. And he'd pick up the milk. Sometimes you get one can, sometimes two, sometimes 3 or 4 from the farmers, and haul them up that far, and unload them and send them on into the creamery. I think he had that route for about 20 years, and then after he left, Clyde had it.
I remember Clyde working it.
Yeah, and it was quite a job. It was an all-day job gathering up the milk and taking it up to Layton. Finally, they moved it over to Clearfield, and we took it to Clearfield for quite a number of years. But we had quite a few horses. Dad took pretty good care of the horses. Usually they weren't real heavy horses. They were lighter that, well, they go a little faster probably than the heavier ones. And in the winter, you could start in November, November, and they'd have snow on the roads from then until spring. Always, all the time. That seems amazing to me, because now the roads are scraped off so they're dry, but then you could go on the snow on the roads that long.
Yes.
But he had, well, he traveled most. We didn't go over on anything north of the Syracuse Merck for a long time to pick stuff up, but we used to go everything from there south and west and east. We used to go down on the lower road and pick up milk. Later they put the cheese factory in over on the road a mile north of the Syracuse Merck, and they used to put a cheese factory in there. And by that time my dad had bought an old Ford truck. That was a caution. You could make a little better time hauling the milk, but in the mornings I can remember cranking on that old Ford truck and jack a back wheel up and crank it. In the winter you'd have to drain the water out as quick as you got home and fill it up the next morning before you started. And he later bought a Chevrolet, and that was like heaven to have that Chev, because it would start. But that was quite a part of our life, that old milk route.
Yeah.
It was.
quite a service to the community too, you know, the farmers.
Well, yes, that was a way to get their milk to market. They weren't quite as strict on inspections in those early days as they got to be later.
Yeah.
But, it was a way to get milk to the market.
Yeah.
Some of them were noted as big dairymen, and others weren't. The Bennett family were always one of the big ones. The Thurgoods usually had quite a few cows.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And, it was part of life.
Yes.
What they do for recreation, Mr. Evans, do you remember in the summer, some of them going up canyons, stay a week, or?
Yes, always in the summer you had an outing up the weekend. It would usually be for the whole ward. They'd go up there and spend a week. Zion's Camp up Weber Canyon used to be the favorite spot. We used to go up there every summer. Go up there, and that was always look forward to that.
We kids loved that.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
did. We'd play baseball up there and do everything. It was just a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I remember one year, I guess it was the scouts, I suppose, that figured out a trip on horseback. We went right up over the top of the mountain and down to Zion's Camp. And I remember I couldn't use old Silver for some reason, and they gave me another horse to ride, old Chub, and he was a little bigger. I remember we got up on the highway. It was paved north of Layton. A car come past and stalled, scared my horse, and he fell down and lit on my leg, and I really got banged up. I had to limp on home with him, and I was broken hearted that I couldn't go up there.
That's twice you got that leg hurt.
Oh, more than twice. Yeah, this poor leg has been through the wars.
Mm.
But that was one of the high points of the year, was that camping up at Zion's Camp.
Oh yeah.
It's funny that recreation, we used to do it together. Now it isn't. You do it separately, to go places separately, I'm sure, out there too. But then it used to be a ward affair.
It was.
In the school, we had every year they'd put on a 3-act play in the school, which the whole town took an interest in. And the church would put on things that the whole town would participate in.
Mm.
It was just different. I mean, if the church seemed to be the center of your recreation as well as your spiritual advancement.
Yeah.
Not that way so much anymore, but the church is an integral part of our growing up, though.
Yes, it was.
Still.
It was.
Anything else you can think of? My family kind of broke up out there. My dad married again, and the families just didn't mix very good, it seemed like. Through later years, we got along better, but kind of broke up. Ida married Milton Steed and went down to Widsoe to live. Elsie taught school taught in Syracuse for, I think, 6 or 7 years. And she went out to Hiawatha to teach, and then later to Kanab. That's where she finished teaching, was down to Kanab. And it left us kids home running the farm and taking care of things. It was pretty rough going to high school. grade school was all right. You could get by in grade school, but in high school it was a rough proposition. Going there having to top beets and pick tomatoes before you started school, it was pretty rough.
Sure it was.
This Davis High School,
Yes. I went 1 year at the North Davis High School.
did you 1 year there?
And that was kind of interesting. There are 3 rooms in the school, but there are only 2 classes. And it was quite enjoyable. We had a good time. Then they closed it down after that year. Now when old Davis then was a sophomore. We went there for a year and a half, and then I told my dad I wasn't going to school anymore unless I could go down to West High School and start when the school started and go to school full time instead of having to top beets and pick tomatoes and stuff. I graduated from West High School.
Oh, I see.
Salt Lake.
Oh. Hmm.
Remember, I seen a picture of the first bus supposedly that hauled them from Syracuse to Davis High. You remember that bus?
Sure do. Sure do.
I don't have it with me, but I got one. I'm having it made up. Get a copy of it. It's
Yeah, we had to go up and catch it up at the Syracuse Merc. We caught the bus there. I remember Mary and Willie and I one day, we missed the bus on purpose so we didn't have to go. That's, I remember they had a bus, and one day they had a flat tire up above Nalders. I remember we were happy as could be. They had a flat tire, and we missed half a day's school. Somebody had a patch of onions out in the field. I remember eating those little onions and went to school, and no one could stand us at school that day. I don't really remember what year it was that they closed that school down. I guess I could figure it out, but let's see, I would have been 14, I guess. So it would be in 1924 that they closed the high school, probably. The old North Davis High School. I remember all my brothers went there. My sisters went to North Davis High. When I see these big high schools that they spend $20 million building now, and think about that little old North Davis High School, I think our educational program might have advanced, but in my opinion they've made some mistakes along the way. I don't think they need a $20 million school to teach kids.
Mm.
And I think we could tone that down a little bit.
I agree.
Do you have any, Mr. Hansen, any pictures that of the old times or the old stores or the schools or
No,
anything?
I
of that
don't.
nature?
In the moving around and everything, I lost all that early stuff that I had.
Mm.
Let me look in this file. I'm sure I don't have any pictures though. Couldn't find them in a hurry. I'll find them and mail them to you though, if you want me to.
I don't think we have a picture. If we get a copy, a picture of your dad, that'd be appreciated to have there with the history and that.
Okay.
You know, if it's
Before we leave, we'd like to find out about your brother's addresses, are they in the phone book so we can find them easy, or?
Yes. Ole,
In case we wanna see them.
Ole lives at 1373 Harvard Avenue. Lynn lives down at in Shoal, Arizona,
Oh,
and I don't know any address for him. He just moved down there, and he hasn't sent us an address. Didn't send us a
All right.
Christmas card. I think Shoal might get it, and might not.
That's in Salt Lake, Baldy.
Yes.
Salt Lake. Okay. Good, appreciate it.
He could probably tell you a lot more than I can about Syracuse.
we were thinking of seeing him, getting his input too.